Hello everyone and welcome back to our settlement here. The Romans have left us. They've finally pulled their last troops out and we have been left to fend for ourselves now for a few hundred years. Over those years, a lot of things have changed. At the moment, we are in 900 AD and we are continuously being invaded by Vikings and people aren't having a fun time about it. So the kind of the kingdoms that are here in the UK at the moment, there are a few big ones with some sub ones. So the main ones is Wessex, where the capital city of Winchester is, where we have established a proper little city there with King Alfred soon to be put on the throne and his rule over the UK. We have Mercia, where London is. We have Northumbria, East Anglia, Essex, Kent and Sussex. And at this point in time, our Sims are known as Anglo-Saxons. So that is a kind of a mix between English, German, and and French as well. Kind of how immigration went in from 400 to 600 AD was when the large population of Germans came over, and they had an influx because of the Roman Empire falling, so there was a lot more ability to move about without them coming to kill you. And between 300 and 700 AD, which was a big migration period from Brittany and Normandy in modern day France. So we got a lot of different people. Kind of the term Anglo-Saxon was given to distinguish between the Germans and the British that were living there at the time. And obviously we still had a few British Romans there as well. So it was kind of a big mixing pot. It wasn't later on until the English actually distinguished themselves of being Saxons, and they would call themselves Old Saxons because they would have originated from the original Saxons that had come and settled here. And as the Roman Empire sort of left Britain at the early stages, it kind of left the Roman British leaders to face an increase in security problems from seaborne raiders. So these were the early Vikings that were coming over, and they had to enlist a lot of the Anglo-Saxon mercenaries that were about now, because obviously our technologies and stuff were increasing in skill, so we could have proper fighters and proper stuff as well to fight back the invaders. So a lot of the buildings at this time had a lot of Celtic, Roman, Germanic influences. Sort of the normal general buildings that any like of the villages and stuff that lived in were rectangular post-built structures. So they put timber posts and drive them into the ground, and they built their framework from there. So we've tried to use a lot of posts and stuff in the build, and they used wood instead of the mud this time to make their walls from, and they would still have the thatch roofs. But if you are a chief, you could obviously afford to have a wooden roof on you. So our technology in building and stuff was improving as well. Also, the like normal houses with the thatch would have a little hole in the roof to let out smoke, because everyone had moved their fires indoors by now, and they had to let the smoke out somehow, or you'd be like choked out. Most of the towns were built on like old Roman towns that have sadly gone and kind of eroded away, and we'll be able to see the remnances of this in the little columns and broken pillars and stuff that have been left behind. They also had a lot of small crop gardens that are at the side of their houses, so they could grow their own food from their family, because obviously it was getting to a point where people were trading a lot more, so you'd either have to buy your food or you would have to grow your own, basically. So the new sort of well, not new technologies, but we are improving our technology. Our blacksmith is getting a lot more skilled. He has become a extremely valid member of the community. We have better weapons, so we can defend ourselves against the Vikings and all the other different neighboring towns and stuff. So we're getting better on that. Our woodworker is now called a carpenter, so he is becoming more skilled and making different furnitures, and obviously helping to make the buildings as well. And it also allows us to start weaving fabrics and making different styles of clothes and rugs and covers to keep us warm, so we don't have to skin animals anymore. And we've also domesticated the animals around us a bit more, so we have new jobs like shepherds and things like that. We're also improving our fishing by making fishing traps instead of just normally fishing for them. So we're kind of applying our ingenuity and different skills that we have learnt from the Romans and from the new influences from Germany and France as well. We also have better boats, and we've built jetties for docking. So as our little town, that we can call it now, is based by a river, we'll see later on that they've built a little jetty so tradesmen can come and they can travel about the country a bit more easily than they would have been able to do. So the Vikings actually came to Britain on the 8th of June 793, when they destroyed an abbey on Linda's farm and sort of scared all the monks away and claimed it as their own little lot. And the sort of main town that they kind of conquered here in Britain was York, known as Jorvik, and it was the centre of the kingdom for them from 866. And in York itself, they've kind of discovered sort of silk caps, kind of cornet shells from the Red Sea, suggesting that the Vikings themselves were trading all the way out into the Byzantine Empire and beyond the Caspian Sea, which is quite an impressive feat. They were probably traveling all around the globe, discovering new places. They kind of led them to sort of come over to Britain and sort of invade. There were many different possibilities to that. They kind of had, in Britain, we had a weak political bodies, so the people who ran the country at the beginning weren't very strong, because obviously the Romans had left. We were kind of left in a bit of a shambles, so we were kind of an easy target to sort of let them invade. There wasn't that many people in charge to sort of protect us or anything. That kind of changes over the sort of the hundreds of years as we establish kings and lords and all that lovely stuff. And there was also the fact that they had a large population back in the Scandinavian countries, and the land was just not up to giving them enough food or providing for them, so they kind of had to migrate away to sort of prosper a bit more. They also had different ideologies to what they had here in Britain, so they came from a Scandinavian pagan culture, whereas here in Britain they were becoming more Christians and still a few pagans, but a different type. So they were kind of the main, and it was easy for them to sort of war against the people there, because obviously they didn't believe in the same things as them. So it's always good for a religious war or two here and there. So in Britain, kind of the main point of attack was kind of the north and eastern side of the country. So York and East Anglia and sort of those main places, and particularly Cumbria was a main spot for them, as it's right off the North Sea, and it's easier kind of to land and dock there because it's quite a flat sort of land in that area, so it's very easy for them to get up on shore. And Wales and Scotland had different various experiences. Kind of Wales wasn't targeted that much because it was more the other side of England, and Scotland was mainly invaded in its like northern islands, so like Orkney and Shetland kind of targeted and kind of had little settlements on them. The hierarchy of the towns and cities and the country was changing as well at this point, so we now progressively got a king in charge of the country who ruled over everyone. That became Alfred and Edward the Confessor, and we did have a Viking at one point called Ethelred, and he married into, I think it was Alfred's daughter, and they sort of progressed the line and sort of married between them. I don't know whether I'm getting confused between the TV program, but then it was priests, as priests were becoming more and more prominent as the religion was building in the country. And then it was the chiefs, which were the kind of leaders of the town that would later become lords and stuff. So they were kind of in charge of the little towns. They would report back to the king, whom the king would kind of take advice from the priests and kind of God himself. And then we had the mercenaries, who would go and protect everyone from the invading threat. And then we had the tradespeople who made the goods, because obviously if they can't make the swords and the shields to protect the mercenaries and fight back, then you're kind of screwed. And then we have the farmers, and now we are starting to get some really poor people as well, so beggars, and obviously some slaves as well. It's kind of carried over from the Roman times, and obviously the Vikings themselves would take slaves to keep the women as their own and do with them as they please. So as we are building our first proper church, I would go into the religious situation in the country. So as the Roman Empire started to convert over to Christianity in 395 AD, making it the official religion of the country, while they were still kind of occupying most of the Roman Empire. So obviously some of the Britons over here would have picked that up and sort of adopted it as their new sort of religion. But most of the Anglo-Saxons that arrived were pagans. So you got Germanic pagans and French pagans, and they kind of wanted to over time convert all the pagans over to Christianity. As obviously at this time as well, there would be popes being made in Italy. And the first church that was ever built here in Britain was in 597 AD in Canterbury, and that's probably where Canterbury Cathedral is now. So it's kind of lasted the time. And when they built them, they tried to include pagan symbols as well as Christian symbols to kind of bridge the gap between the two things, to encourage people to come in. And King Alfred was well known for his enthusiasm with religion and using it to influence him and how he acted and how he made decisions and ruled the country and everything. Kind of that's how it started, the kings being extremely religious and stuff like that. The churches themselves were built in stone and brick and wood as well. Kind of the more poorer areas would have had just wood structures to start off with, and they actually reused bits of Roman work. So a good example of this is Winchester Cathedral. You can kind of see Roman bricks in it, which is quite cool that they used from the old buildings. And they also started, because obviously Christianity brought into kind of brought into people's minds what life after death and everything. So we now have like proper graves and graveyards as well for properly burying the dead instead of putting them in mounds. And they either used to have a round tower, or they had a nave style, which is the one we have here, which is a little square one at the top. And the church kind of develops over the years, as we all know, to what it is today. So there is a big misconception with Vikings that they were all bloodthirsty invaders where come to a fight, and most of them didn't actually come for that reason. They kind of came here peacefully and brought to kind of settle their families in. It was only the fact that we probably didn't like them coming here and settling was another story. They also came and built their homes, which were called long houses, and they also brought their own gods and their belief in magic and storytelling around the fires and everything. The Norse people had their own laws and government. The community would all gather together at a meeting called a thing, and they would be able to settle any problems or make decisions about different things. So there would be a judge known as a law speaker who would pass the final sort of judgment on what they would do, and all the people would vote about what would happen. So it was quite a diplomatic process, even back then. Even though we think now that it's kind of a modern thing, it really wasn't. The Vikings brought it in, and there were different punishments to do with the different crimes as well. So you were either like put your head on a pitchfork, or you were kind of made an outlaw, where you were taken, all your worldly things were taken off you, and you were forced to live in the wilderness, and anyone was allowed to hunt you down and kill you as well, which is, it's always a good thing when you know your whole town is off there trying to find you. They also like to use set of agreements with fights as well. They had a type of duel known as a holmgang, where you would kind of duel between whoever won was favoured by the gods, so you would be fighting to the death. And in Viking society, so they were coming from a society where the king was the most powerful, like how it became here in Britain over the time that they were coming, and he would have a lot of money because he would make sure the kingdom was safe, and that the followers were loyal to him as well. Under him were the nobles, or the wealthy Vikings, known as jarls, and they were landowners or traders, and they employed men to work for them. Then there were the kralls, who were the everyday people. They did jobs like farming and craft work. The kralls weren't as rich or as important as the jarls, but they weren't poor either. And then at the bottom of the pile were the thralls, or the slaves, and they had the hardest, dirtiest jobs, and if they tried to run away, they would be killed. And however, the thralls could earn enough money to buy their freedom as well, so they could work their way up the class standing and become a carl. The Vikings were known for their Viking Warriors as well, so they would have long swords and axes, and they were good trained swordsmen. They would pass their knowledge from father to son, and they would also be buried with their own weapons when they died, and obviously had a glorious death and go to Valhalla. They forms of attacks they loved to do was surprise attacks, so they kind of hide in the trees and sort of surprise any of the English guards. And they were obviously great shipsmen as well, which was one of the skills that they brought over, so they would be able to sail for 24 hours. They had long boats, which were the best boats at the time. And fastest ship were known as dragon ships or long ships, and they were for raiding and wars. So you'd probably see the English coast littered with those, and they had very distinctive looks as well because they had the little heads on the fronts, and they were super long with their big billowing sails in the middle. So we are going to take a little tour around our town and see how our Sims are faring in the Viking Age. So I'll see you for the next one.